It was an honour during that referendum campaign to campaign with people on this platform all over the country under the banner of Another Europe is Possible. And the arguments we made in that campaign is that we had big problems with the current European Union on the great basis of democracy and of neoliberalism, but we were going to fight to remain and reform. Now, we were up against a campaign, a vicious, racist, bigoted, anti-immigrant campaign, which portrayed immigrants as criminals and rapists and murderers, which lied over and over again about Turkey joining the European Union and we would be flooded with Turkish migrants. And of course that infamous picture showing the borders we would have with Iraq and Syria, implying we would have these refugees who were demonised, flooding in and again demonised in those horrendous ways. That breaking point poster. I remember that day when we were up going to Nottingham. I was there with Michael Chesham, who's not here today, and we had our banners ready, and we had to cancel that meeting because Joe Cox, a Labour MP, had been murdered by a fascist terrorist yelling death to traitors, freedom for Britain. That was the nadir, I have to say. And the day of that referendum result was the worst day politically for many of us in our lives. Not, I suspect, because of the debate that would then take place about our relationship with the European Union. Because it represented a carnival of reaction, where the most bigoted and racist anti-immigrant elements of our society felt vindicated, and they celebrated that result with surging hate crimes on the streets, as they believed that small racist, violent minority, that they had a mandate to abuse and attack people who are from minorities and from other countries. Now, the Labour Party today is led by people with lifelong, impeccable anti-fascist and anti-racist credentials. But the issue of freedom of movement has been conceded. And that isn't right. Because for many years, all of us on this platform have used whatever platform we have to make very straightforward arguments. That the injustices that don't just scar our society, but define it, are not caused by Polish cleaners or Lithuanian care workers or Italian nurses or doctors, but they are caused by the banks who plunged us into economic calamity, the tax dodgers who don't pay their taxes, the politicians who don't build the housing that this country so desperately needs, and the poverty-paying bosses who exploit a neoliberal society that allows them to attack and undermine people's rights and conditions and their pay. And not one of those arguments has changed in its validity or its truth because of that referendum result. It remains the same. Now, I'm from Stockport, which voted narrowly to remain, but not the part of Stockport I'm from, it voted to leave. There were virtually no immigrants where I grew up. There were lots of social problems, a lack of affordable housing, a lack of secure jobs, falling living standards, public services under stress, all caused by the failure of politicians to build the housing this country needs, by deindustrialisation, by austerity, and by the attack on the labour movement, upheld by New Labour. But many people I grew up with saw those problems through the prism of immigration, even in a place with so few immigrants. And that was partly a failure of the left in our moments particularly of political isolation and weakness. And it was also the case that many places in London with some of the worst social problems, a housing crisis, for example, where the highest child poverty in the country, voted to remain in the places with the largest number of immigrants. And that isn't a coincidence. My view firmly is we have to step up and make the argument, again, that these problems are not caused by immigrants, they are caused by the people at the top. And if we concede on freedom of movement, then by default, we concede the argument. We're not telling people the truth. There's not a single fact to justify those arguments. And indeed, as Maya said, and I was there proudly backing those LSE cleaners, rather than migrants being responsible for undercutting, they were there fighting against the undercutting of terms and conditions. And by fighting every single one of them from minority and migrant backgrounds, many of them women, they fought and they were demonised and attacked And by fighting, they won against the race to the bottom in terms and conditions. And that is a long tradition across Europe, across America, of often the most militant workers who win rights not just for themselves, but by default for everybody else, because they stop the race to the bottom in terms and conditions. So we have to renew that argument, that we have to win the battle for public opinion. Because of course the argument that Labour leadership are making is that the referendum result somehow means that we have to concede on the basis we've lost the debate with public opinion. Well, I don't accept that, because it's not true. None of those arguments. So we have to now argue, yes, for the socialist policies that Labour are offering on building the housing this country needs, the council housing in particular, on investing in the secure jobs of the future, in reversing austerity, so the NHS, which would collapse overnight, were it not for doctors and nurses from all over the world. As Dennis Skinner said when he had a heart operation, it was like being treated by the United Nations. That we make those arguments for socialist policies to redress those injustices, and we also argue for freedom of movement combined with policies that prevent attacks on the living standards of working people, regardless of what country they come from. So let's not concede the argument, because that's what we're doing otherwise. We stick to the principles we had during the referendum campaign and before, and we say no scapegoating of EU migrants. Let's stand up to the elites who are responsible for all these injustices. So let's get out there, campaign in our communities, particularly Leave communities. That's where we need to be. We're in the heartland of Romania, where we're standing right now. We need to go to the sorts of places that I grew up and others grew up, where people have very, very different opinions. But go out there, make those arguments, argue for a socialist Britain, where migrants aren't scapegoated for the crimes and injustices of those vested elites at the top.